Now, speaking of the women, because they are compelling in this story, let's go to the Obamas. Very interesting at the beginning of the campaign. Michelle Obama's not very keen on this whole idea of him running for president. She has logical reasons. But she comes around, but she goes to him and she says she has this list of issues that she wants to go over with him. What was on that list? What were the
I mean, she was. I mean, I would just frame it this way. So the first thing to say is that, it's a traditional trope in politics that the spouses are always a little bit hesitant, and that somehow the candidate has to say, well, I'll only do this if my wife supports me. In both cases, in both the aspects of that, this was a different sort of situation. She really didn't want Barack Obama to run. She was very unhappy in their marriage in some ways while he was a Senator, in his first 2 years.
Because she was living there and he was living here.
She had not signed up for a commuter marriage. She was kind of miserable while he was in Washington. She when the first inkling of him running came up, she would go to her friends and she would refuse to discuss it. She was like, that is the last thing in the world I want him to do. She also had this kind of healthy skepticism about him, at least at that point, which was like, what's he done to get all this attention? He gave a big speech in Boston, big deal. I love my husband and he might be a great man, but at this point, we quote her in the book at one point saying, maybe someday you'll do something that will merit all this attention. So when the moment, when the moment came and he was leaning towards running, he was pretty clear that she was the biggest obstacle that she had to get over. And we talk about in the book when she does sit down with him finally and say, okay, I might consider this, but here are the things you need to talk to me about. And you're not going to do your normal Barack, like, yeah, I'll do all that. We're going to have a specific discussion about how you're going to deal with the kids.
Like a lawyer almost.
Right, not like a lawyer, as a lawyer. I think as a litigator. She went through a long list of things, running from everything from his personal health, his smoking, which of course he promised, that was supposed to be a deal breaker, that if he kept smoking.
Is he still smoking now?
He smokes like a chimney, for Christ's sakes. Okay. I don't think there's been a day from the time he pledged to quit smoking until today that he has not been smoking. I say that on largely, not entirely, but speculation. But he promised to do all the right things, and a lot of them revolved around their kids. I mean, she was very adamant about how many days are you going to get back to see the kids? How are you going to keep in touch with them? What about ballet lessons? What about recitals? What about soccer games? How's this going to work? How's our family going to withstand the attacks that we're going to get? We need a plan for that. We know what the freak show of politics is like. Our family, especially given the historic first that we may represent, is going to be attacked in kind of novel ways. What about your security? She was terrified about his physical safety. And so the campaign went to great lengths to assure her that before the Secret Service came on, that they would hire private security for him, et cetera, et cetera. She had a list, a bill of goods, and it wasn't until he got checks next to all those boxes that she finally gave her assent.
It's such an interesting thing, too, in the book. I mean, the parts about John Edwards are incendiary and have been much reported, and but it was an interesting distinction you made about how much he loved being in the bubble. And the Obamas, especially Barack Obama, seemed to me like somebody that the bubble was nothing but chafed with him, that this was not an easy adjustment for either of them, but especially him. It's interesting what makes a person like that kind of lifestyle. I mean, what was it about John Edwards that the bubble was, I mean, what is the bubble to people who may not know, and why is it seductive?
We've gotten a fair amount of attention for the book early on our portrait of Elizabeth Edwards,
right.
and being so, in the reality, based on everyone around them, including people still to this day quite sympathetic to her, being so different from what her public image was like. John Edwards...
being a real person.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always
angry, an angry real person.
We always want to say, as we do, a person who'd gone through an extraordinary amount of hardship, losing a teenage son in a tragic accident who was such an important part of their life, going through dealing with cancer on 2 occasions, dealing with her husband's very public infidelity, under enormous pressure, helping obviously to explain, at least in part, the behavior she engaged in. John Edwards was a different cycle, and in some ways even more of a hidden thing within the campaign. When he first got into politics, his first time he ran for office in 1998, running for Senate, his calling card was that he was such a nice guy. That, let alone for U.S. Senator, even for a famous successful trial lawyer, he was an extraordinarily nice guy. People. And that seemed to persist for the most part in his first 2 years in the Senate. By all accounts we were given in 2000, when Al Gore considered putting him on the ticket, he changed a little bit. He began to care more about what kind of clothes he wore, how big his entourage was, what the airplanes were like. Then when he was on the ticket in 2004, there was a dramatic change. One of the ways our sources illustrated for us, which we quite liked so much we made it a chapter title, is when he was first in politics, and he would get this extraordinary crowd reaction because he's a dynamic guy. People would say, his aides would say, how did that event go? And he would say, oh, they love me, as if to say politics is so phony and weird, the crowd really reacted.
Ironic.
And with a great deal of irony. And then when the ego monster, as they called it, took over in 2004, he would bound off the stage after a big rally, and without being asked by anybody, he would say, they love me. Same phrase, but said differently. And that change persisted. The minute the 2004 election ends, he's on the losing ticket. His wife's cancer has just been discovered. He is plotting literally days after that to say, Hillary's going to be the front runner in 2008. I'm going to be her challenger. And that bubble, as you call it, the entourage of security, aides, donors, hangers-on, people in the crowd, he began to like it a lot, as contrasts to where he started out.
It's interesting, too, because of the principal characters of the book. If you include Edwards with Obama and Palin and McCain and Clinton, which you have to do, he's the only one who never has a crisis of confidence. Every one of the others actually...
Even though he had lots of reasons to have such a crisis.
He had this...
And crises of conscience, too. Yes.
Right. He's the one who, not only when he knows that the National Enquirer is working this story, he's still working Tom Daschle to either get on the ticket with Obama. Well, if I'm not going to get on the ticket, Attorney General, he's thinking he can be Attorney General right up till...
Let's be clear. In the summer of 2008, when his out-of-wedlock child was now going on 6 months of age, he was still not wanting to confess his paternity,
still having no
because he
crisis.
still thought there was a chance that he could be Barack Obama's Attorney General.
Yes, I know. It's just
there is a lot of crazy stuff in Game Change.
Yeah.
That is the craziest. It is
Well,
the most.
it is.
Is the greatest pure example
It's the most
of delusion.
delusional.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the most delusional. Question, a journalism question. The National Enquirer did break this story. They were right. They're putting themselves up for a Pulitzer. Do you think that's appropriate? I'm serious.
I won't opine on the Pulitzer thing, but I will say that there's no question that they beat everybody on this story, and there is almost nothing. I would have to go back and actually read it more carefully because I haven't read it in a long time. I don't think there's nothing of any significant importance about which they were wrong when it came to the coverage of John Edwards in the story.
And an interesting question to ask that we don't address in the book because it's not our focus is there was the stories in late 2007, and then there were the stories in the summer of 2008 that led Edwards to do his Nightline interview with Bob Woodruff and acknowledge the relationship in a limited way, but not paternity. Go read those stories and ask yourself who the source or sources were for the National Enquirer. It's a fascinating question because, as John said, both sets of stories are nailed. If there's errors in them, they are tiny. The basics and a lot of the details are absolutely nailed. The sources were clearly very well informed. And if you're John Edwards and you don't know who the source of that is yet, I'm sure it'll drive him crazy along with everything else.
Well, do you think now that his wife has filed for divorce that he recognizes that she really doesn't want to be with him?
I think it would be hard to miss the signal at this point. Yeah. That's assuming that he knows about it, given that he's still in Haiti, I think, at this point.
Redeeming himself. Well,
doing God's work.
Everybody should have a chance to redeem themselves. Because, as I was saying, these crises that these individual candidates have, and they all had them. I mean, even Obama. I mean, you painted very colorfully of his having to have virtually an intervention from his team to get him back up and into it, and he was the one. And even he had his moment where I guess they sort of hit the wall. It's a sort of a wall that they hit.
Well, it's